Thank you all. Thank you all for being here. This is a third session today, really about wine communication. We had a very good early session about where did PRs fit into it. We then had another session on whether or not it's the job of a wine communicator to sell wine. And in a funny way, this is probably the one we could have had at the beginning, because now we're actually defining terms. What is wine communication, and who are the communicators? And I have to admit that I added what is wine to this for reasons which will become clear. I'm not going to introduce all of the panelists in great detail, but I will tell you who we've got and why I've got them. Justin Howard-Sneyd, who some of you have seen before today, has a background in retailing wine, both in supermarkets and through direct selling, through Laithwaites. And is one of the cleverest and most insightful people that I know. Dr. Tyler Colman, who I've discovered is not actually a real doctor because he couldn't do anything for my knee when I asked him this morning, is one of the bloggers who genuinely, because we've been talking today about bloggers who are talking to themselves. Tyler is one of the few who isn't singing in the shower, that I accuse all of us doing. He's one of the people that genuinely has reach, and the reason that I know he has reach is because of the guy sitting next to him, Paul Mabray from Vintank, who again you've seen earlier today, some of you, whose business really he is the Snowden. He is the not necessarily the whistleblower, but he's the guy who is bugging everything that all of us do. And the scary thing is that I think that Paul knows how many people are reading and reacting to what I do more than I do. So I don't find it easy talking to Paul, but after a few drinks it works pretty well. And Per Karlsson at the end is going to give us his own perspective, because he is a full-time communicator, essentially, well, and tour operator, and photographer, but that's communication. But interestingly, in Per's case, he lives in Scandinavia, where there are controls on the way that wine can be marketed. And that's very relevant, because those of you who know what's happening in France at the moment, there are proposals to limit wine communication pretty drastically. And the idea is that you wouldn't be allowed to say anything positive about wine, even in a blog or all sorts of things like that. And Russia is already there. So it'll be interesting to hear his perspective. And I want to give enough time for some questions. I know there are at least 2 or 3 people from China in the audience, and I'd love to hear some of their input they're from the Dijon Wine Business School. I'm going to kick off with I'm going to throw the ball onto the pitch and start kicking it around myself, passing to myself, and then carry on. But I'm going to ask about what is wine, which is a strange question. There you go, wine. And now here are the things that we associate with wine: vintage, grape variety, appellation, soil, critical recognition, winemaker, region. So yeah, that's that kind of the universe of wine. And that's all these things that people who are buying wine are interested in, at least some of those. Then we've got this. It's bigger than wine. And have any of you come across this grababa before? Probably not, because I invented it. It actually stands for grape-based beverage alcohol. It's a very ugly acronym. I deliberately made it ugly. I made it ugly because most of you will think that what it's about is ugly. What it is stuff that people buy without caring about who made it, where it came from, what vintage, etc., etc. And they're buying it like they buy beer. All of these: Spanish Red, Pinot Grigio, Yellowtail, Moscato, White Zin, Cupcake, Keep Light, all of these, Chardonnay, Merlot, they're all stuff. And Keep Light, by the way, is one that I know a little bit about. It's a wine that is actually, it's got water and fruit flavoring added. And it's 5%, and it's doing very well in the UK. And we tested it on consumers for the producers. Yeah, I'm on the dark side, guys. And we tested it against fruit-flavored cider, which is the fastest growing cider category. And we tested on the target audience, and they didn't know, they didn't see the label. And the fruit-flavored wine cocktail beverage that they liked best was the one that tasted the most like Recorder-Lig fruit-flavored cider. And then that was the one they sold, and that's in a British supermarket, and it's selling very well. That is a grape-based beverage by any standards because it's made with wine, but it doesn't bear any resemblance to wine whatsoever. And some of you will probably think that that's also true of some of the other wines on this list on the left. Let's see if we can Carver that fits into that. Sorry, Carver producers. No, somehow it doesn't always work that way. Try it here. New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. Now, this is a quote from Jamie Good in his wine manifesto. Many wines, as Nigel said, they're just wine. Don't say too much about them. So a nice old picture of a guy drinking wine like that, and a nice modern picture of a guy drinking wine just like that. I created the idea of fruits, newts, and cutes in a satirical piece I wrote. Basically, fruits are Moscato, Whites, and these are fruity wines. They're drinks that taste overtly fruity. Then we've got newts. They're neutral. Pinot Grigio, a lot of South African Chenin Blanc. It's wine that doesn't, it's like beer. You just drink it, you slug it back. It doesn't have to have flavor. It's not supposed to have flavor. And then we've got cutes, which little black dress, cupcake, flip-flop, skinny girl. They're cute names, and that's all the animals. And those are three elements, if you like, that fit within the Grababa category, as far as I'm concerned. Now, we've got Lilugo, my other ugly term. Anyone guess what that is? Liquid luxury good. So Lafite, Grange, Napa Cabernet, Cristal, Cloudy Bay, all these sort of names, but I would include Campo Viejo Reserva. For some people, that is a luxury good. For some people, Apotic, or some of the smartly labeled inexpensive wines, are a luxury good for them. The point about these is they're often bought in the same ways as Grababa. They're not bought with people necessarily looking at the vintage or the man who made it or anything else. And if you see, they overlap. So some people buying Grange care about Grange and who made it, and other people buy Grange, certainly in China at the moment, because of the price and the prestige, and it's a luxury good they give to somebody else. So I quite like this. This is one of the ways of drinking. What is wine communication? I'm going to throw some ideas here. We've got wine, we've got articles, magazines, books, what a lot of you do, packaging, blogs, obviously, and then when I've broken that down, so I've included blogs by producers, by distributors. The gentleman asked the question earlier today, what about distributor? The distributor's got his own blog now. The producer's got his own blog, and if you're just a blogger or a communicator, you are competing with them for attention. PR and advertising, websites, crap, most of them, forums, teachers, public speakers, TV, radio, movies, all these things, you can look at this. And the bottom one, WOM, what's that? Word of mouth. Pretty important, there at the bottom for a reason. Now we've got, I'm going to not go through all those, you'll be very pleased to know, but I think we'll look at the blogger first. There she is. You may know her. This is something I apologize for repeating, but I think it's quite important. This came across my desk on the 22nd. This is the Bordeaux, a set of US bloggers invited to Bordeaux, and they wrote, and it's such a nice piece. It's a balmy 84 degrees. The weather feels surprisingly warm for fall. My driver, I'm a momentary tour guide, It's such a lovely picture of Bordeaux this autumn. Any of you aware of what the harvest has been like in Bordeaux this year? These people weren't. They were there, bloggers invited by Bordeaux, and they were not aware. It's a challenging year, but it's fine. It's all going to be fine. Now, here's a winemaker. He's called Pepe. We'll see him again later on. He's now a bit of a communicator. His name, in this case, is Gavin Quinney. This is his blog on Bordeaux 2013 on Jancis Robinson's website. So this communication thing is getting interesting because Jancis Robinson was a writer, a journalist. Now she's a publisher. This is her website on which we read the words written by a producer. So communication is moving pretty broad here. And he is saying, actually, it was a crap vintage. He didn't actually use that word. He just said, if there are any successes, and there will be some, which is not encouraging for Bordeaux in 2013. However, Stéphane de Renoncourt, he's another winemaker. He was slightly more direct. It's a shit year. Yeah, but the bloggers, it's fine. It's not a shit year because those US bloggers didn't see any shit, so it's all right. Now we have the critic. We'll meet him again later. Anybody who needs to buy that equipment, I can get it supplied. This is Tim Atkin. You may have heard of him. He's a friend of at least several of ours, one of the best wine writers in Britain and indeed the world. And he has, just repeat what he's got here, he has been campaigning against Pinot Grigio. most popular wine style around. It's great. It's like saying, I hate Ford cars. Nobody should drive a Ford car. Ford cars are crap. So that's good. He doesn't like Pinot Grigio, and he tells everybody he doesn't like Pinot Grigio. Trouble is, as he says, guess what? Pinot Grigio sales have gone through the roof. There's even talk of if that were me, I'd be thinking there's something wrong with this picture. You know, I'm telling people not to do it, and they're doing it. Maybe they're not listening or not telling them the right way. Cover of Hollywood Reporter. These days, who needs a snooty journalist telling you what to listen to? Well, does that apply to Mr. Atkin telling you not to drink Pinot Grigio? Now, the other communicator we could have, celebrity. Some of you may know this guy, some of you may not, but he's talking about his Merlot flow. Some of this is not easy to read. I won't read it out. You can probably read it yourselves. It's kind of smooth or whatever. If you pop some champagne, you get the general gist. I couldn't write this stuff. If I wrote that stuff, I'd be in trouble, but he can. It's smooth. It's important. And he uses the same word as Stéphane de Renoncourt, but I think in a slightly different way. So communication, let's be careful here. And flow, Merlot flow, don't like champagne. Sorry, champagne guys, champagne's not working for him. Merlot flow, you just get laid back. Cup of Merlot, cup, not a glass, not a Riedel glass, interestingly. You're just getting it in. And he got into it because, Moscato, don't even know how to spell it. But this is wine communication. Anyway, and he's talking about Snoop Dogg's commercial for premium St. premium malt, which you can find online. Now we talk about Bill. You don't know about Bill. We'll come back to him, but remember his name. Now, I'm going to give you a picture here of wine communication as it used to be. We've got here, that is Fluffy in the middle. We could have seen her this morning. She's a PR girl. Doesn't she look like a PR girl? Because she does brilliant media coverage. She's lovely. I've been out with people like her. And then we've got Bob, the critic, and Connie. And that's what happened. Pepe pays Fluffy money. Fluffy sends samples or gives trips to Bob. Bob gets to Connie, and Connie buys wine. It's a very simple little model. Now we're going to complicate it a little bit. Pepe has now got himself a Facebook page, which is Connie is maybe reading. And we're now going to do some more stuff. We've got a blogger, and now Pepe is talking to the blogger, maybe even directly to the blogger, not via Fluffy, complicated here. Now it's, I call her Barbie because we can get that blobber Barbie. Anyone, I can tell you where to get this stuff. Now, here, he's now started blogging, Pepe. It's not in good English, but he's blogging. And he's now got a QR code, which is, you can actually get a little picture of Pepe there. And he's on Twitter, and he's got some Facebook likes, and he's got a YouTube video, which you can also get on his, on your phone. And what else have we got here? He's doing tours. He's doing wine tourism, and he's then on Facebook, and he's on Foursquare and everything else. It's great. And what's all this going to? Bill. I mentioned Bill. You remember him? Now, where are we going to see Bill again? This is where I work. This is my office. And Bill is there on the left. My desk is a bit further at the back. And Doris, that's my girlfriend in the middle. She's very big on skiing. If you want to know anything about skiing, talk to Doris. And Terry on the right, you want to know anything about hi-fi, he's your man. And you guessed it, Bill is the wine man. And that's very important. He is the consumer that everybody goes to in that block who knows about wine, and that is a very important thing. And effectively, we are all probably communicating to Bill. Now, how many of you are wine communicators? Hands up. Okay, next question. How many of you have tasted any or all of these wines or would like to? Basque wine, far from here? Anyone? Hands up. You'd like to taste it? Right. Okay, Turkish wine? Anyone here last year? Good, a few hands. This is orange wine. Hands up. Yep. Similar number, good, cool. Right, how about these? Cupcake, red velvet. Anyone want to taste it? Anyone tasted it? Not quite as many as the orange wine. What about Yellowtail? Oh, quite a few. Good. Moscato from Barefoot? Not so many. JP Chenet? Apothec. Very important. Not many have done Apothec. Jacob's Creek? Quite a few. Good. And Beringer Pink Moscato? Not quite so many. Roger Ebert. Anyone heard of Roger Ebert? One of the great critics of the world, movie critic, greatest movie reviewer maybe in the world. Important thing about Roger Ebert is that he tasted Yellowtail. He tasted Apathy. He tasted Muscata. He reviewed Spider-Man. He also reviewed, he did Spider-Man and he did Bergman. He did every movie out there, and he loved all of them, and he gave some of them good reviews and some bad reviews. Spider-Man got 3.5 stars, other things didn't. Meet the Fockers got 2 stars. Basically, he saw The Longest Yard. I kind of liked it in its goofy way. There was a dogged ridiculousness to the film that amused me. But basically, what he's doing is he is out there doing the job for the consumer. He's not just saying, I just do the films with subtitles. So I ask some of you guys, when you leave this room, to say, are you actually wine writers, wine communicators, or are you, if you were doing music, would you be opera critics? Would you just do opera? Would you say, I don't do rock and roll, I don't do jazz, I don't do pop, I just do opera, I just do real wine, I don't do manipulated wine, to go us back to it. And so that's the question. And if you haven't tasted those wines, and if you don't want to taste those wines, which are the biggest growing wines, by the way, sales of Apatic and Cupcake and so on are growing slightly faster than Kvevri wines. You may find that surprising, but it's true. And I'm going to wrap up here just the thought where this is something we've just created, and I don't know if it'll work online, it may not. It obviously doesn't. This is a website we just created where it definitely doesn't work. This nice gentleman is going to have to bring me back. Yeah, please, I might be able to do it. Maybe able to. Hold on, I think we can do this. Basically, it's a website which you've just briefly seen, in which we have food and wine and different things there, and so you've got abalone and albarino on the same page. And consumers are going to vote on which websites they like, which they find most interesting. And it's a bit like what Paul does. We will see what they're interested in. And if they like Kvevri, we'll see more people ticking the Kvevri boxes. And if they like Apatic, we'll see more of that. And I think that you are going to be competing with people talking about food and other things in ways that you don't imagine. So I'm going to finish this by saying there is an apartheid system that says wine is broken down into the bits of wine that we like and don't like, and then there's an apartheid system that separates wine from food. How much do any of you write about food? Do any of the food writers write about wine? And is that sustainable? So I'm now going to hand over to, actually, while somebody's going to come and fix this, I think probably it'd be a better thing if I hand over to Tyler, who can then talk while somebody comes and makes this work, which I think we can do. And Tyler, would like to come over to the mic and... Go ahead. And
I have my notes on here. So.
Okay, I can take this. Well, okay. Why don't we close that for a second?
All right. Well, unfortunately, I don't have any slides for you, but I don't know how I can follow up Robert's presentation anyway. Yes, it's it's a slow economy in the U.S. right now, so we had to cut the slide budget. But yeah, we have a lot of, our question, the main question for our panel to confront today is sort of a definitional one about wine communication, and I figured that the other people would get around to answering that. And so I thought I would just respond to a bit of a different question about what's the place of blogging today. And I want to tell you why blogging is still relevant. Because it was born about a decade ago, and it was, in about the 2004 electoral cycle, where blogging, a presidential election cycle in the United States, where blogging came to the fore and was recognized as being an influential medium. But today it's facing certain headwinds, I think it's certainly fair to say, and it's emerging with sort of a changed place and a changed role. And so just to mention the headwinds, first of all, the fact that there is the very nature of blogging is that there are no barriers to entry, and so there is this problem with it being deluged with information overload, and so there's a lot of noise out there. So that's certainly one headwind that it's the nature of the beast, but as time goes on, there's more and more blogs out there, and certainly there's more social media, and so that's another headwind for blogging, and there's just so much noise, so much participation that there's so many voices that it is both a challenge, but it's also an opportunity I was telling Damian Wilson a couple of days ago, and he found this quite amusing, that when I started blogging, I actually started my website in the Paleolithic era of the internet, when we wrote on cave walls, but it was 2002, and then I started blogging in 2004, but it actually took 6 months for me to get my first comment back in 2004. And so the thing is that back then people were really afraid, in a way, of engaging online. And so today, with the rise of social media, everybody's very accustomed to giving thumbs up and participating and saying profound things like LOL and things like that, So people are much more willing to engage, and so even if there is more discussion going on and it can be harder to focus and have a thread, people are much more likely to engage in some way. Unfortunately, it's not always going to be on a blog. If you own a blog or run a blog, then that conversation can actually happen elsewhere, happen on Facebook page, happen on Twitter, for example. But I think that, I don't speak just for myself when I say I welcome all discussion, that the blog can generate. It's what it's about. And so another headwind would be certainly the reorganization of search, and Google has had a recent change in their algorithm, and now they're featuring more paid results and maps and things like that. And so organic search results, which would benefit blogs, have been kind of pushed down the page a bit more. And besides, the page itself is shrinking as more and more searches are being undertaken on mobile devices. So that's certainly a headwind. We saw that in Google's most recent quarterly report, the rise in the importance of mobile for them, and the declining number of searches on web pages, traditional browsers. Another thing that Google has done to kind of hurt blogs is killing off their Reader, and I quite liked keeping in touch with other blogs via Reader, and I haven't found any of the replacements to be quite as good. But it's it was easy and convenient, if you weren't familiar with it, to be able to aggregate the feeds of several different websites, and then you could just click through quite quickly and keep up with what's going on. So in the absence of that, you have to turn to social media or actually go to visit the website itself. So, and the other headwind, of course, is another one that's sort of endemic to the nature of blogging, and that's the lack of a clear business model. But that hasn't stopped people from diving in, as I say earlier. So, but a few reasons that blogs will stay relevant even with the rise of social media is that sometimes you really do need more than 140 characters to express yourself. I know it's shocking, and sometimes more than a photo. Something is important enough to justify more than just a photo. So a blog provides that opportunity, more space to be able to do that. It's obviously free, global, instantaneous reach, and so that's certainly appealing. But so is social media. But I guess the plus of a blog is that you actually own the content instead of contributing to Facebook or Twitter's IPO, for example. I don't know if you saw Stephen Colbert had a funny piece on the Twitter IPO where he's like, oh, look, I've got 5 million followers and Twitter's going to IPO, and so that he starts crunching the numbers. He's like, that's going to be so lucrative for me. And it's like, it's got a whole lot of zeros. But yeah, so that certainly is an appeal to own your own little corner of the internet. So, and then also, one reason that blogs are going to stay is because they've kind of evolved too. And so now you see, every staff writer, basically, journalist has to maintain a blog as well, because it's a fun way of keeping up with the young folks, keeping up with the. It's very effective form of communication, and so it's essentially required at this point. But blogs have also evolved. Not only have the line between journalism and blogging, blogging and journalism blurred to a certain extent. There's also group blogs now, so that the amount of content, amount of posts on a blog can increase. Whether or not those are all relevant is another question, but there's certainly no lack of content there. So challenges, I'll leave you with just a few challenges for the future. Obviously, being heard in this louder space is certainly a challenge. And the key there, I think, to being heard is to have original content, because it's always important to link back to the original content, I feel, and so the more times you can put out something original, then the more of a thought leader or influencer you will be. And so it's something, and that doesn't have to be necessarily an investigative piece, because to be honest, there's not a lot of investigative journalism that happens in wine writing, but it can be something original, a point of view, for example, or an interview, or something like that. And there's so many perspectives and things to capture in your own view. And so, but a key thing to do there is to be obviously sincere and honest and transparent, and to be a good citizen, and to continue the discussion, because that's what it's all about. And it's such a different time now in wine writing than it was, say, 15 years ago, when there was a much more limited number of voices. And today, back then, there were just these scores handed down from on high, like manna from heaven, and we just had to sort of accept that the score was the be-all, end-all for a given wine. But today, obviously, everything is much more contested, much more discussed, and so instead of this vertical, top-down sort of organization of wine discussion and wine communication today, it's much more lateral, and so I think that's a good thing, net. I think that it's much more fun, but it can be a downside, of course, is that it is harder to keep up with. One other challenge is to provide compelling content, but and I echo what someone said a couple of panels ago, just don't make it too personal unless you're just an extremely interesting person or an extremely talented writer. Probably what happens in daily life is not all that interesting. And so balancing your participation in something, but positioning what you do within broader themes or within broader questions, or a broader discussion more generally is a very productive way to go, I think. Finally, the challenge for the future also remains the business model. And in wine writing, we've seen the paid newsletter with subscribers as, again, a dominant model for a number of years now. But that is really only open to a few people, and even that has shown a bit of fatigue recently. Although the subscription levels are all private, I don't think that it takes a whole lot to think that with the recession that for example, people might want to cut their wine recommendation budget and maybe reorient that just to wine itself. But as we all grasp for a new business model or how to work within this context, we're not alone in thinking about how to do that, certainly, because newspapers from the Washington Post to the New York Times have been certainly struggling with finding a financial model, and we unless you have Jeff Bezos come and foot the bill for you, it's going to be a little bit of a remaining question. So, but I just suggest to maintain your independence and have fun, and if you're doing it for love, then you shouldn't have to worry about the money part. So.
Paul, while I try and get your slides up, actually Paul's next rather than you, Justin, I think. We'll see. Oh, yeah, here. Just jump on somebody. Okay, you see that? But I think I have a feeling that, Paul, you might know whether the truth of those subscription movements or use of some of those subscription sites.
I can tell you how much I've shared. How's that?
Microphone? Yeah.
So Robert, good morning, or it's morning for me, sorry, 3 a.m., but it's afternoon. Robert put me in front of this task to say, who are the wine communicators? So right away I thought about what are the droids that I'm looking for? Who is that person? I'm a nerd. I'm a math guy, so I like to bring everything back to math completely. So we actually watch how messages transfer through the internet. on the back end, because we hear every single conversation about wine. And these are loose estimates from actual stats, but there are only approximately 300,000 people that have written a tasting note on social media. Just let that sink in for 1 second, okay? Let me give you another number, and this is in English speaking, so before Catavino says that worldwide Spanish, this is English speaking language. There are only 3 million people that have mentioned brand, region, or variety. Everyone else says wine. And then 87 million people say, I don't care, I don't want to talk about wine on the internet. This is some real math, guys. This is where the stats, this is based in pieces. I could go deeper about that, but what happens when we see the messages transfer sideways, as Tyler said, between each of us, sharing wine, orange wine is a great example. We start talking about it between ourselves, and it passes down. An interesting stat on top of this is out of this pyramid, this triangle of influence pyramid, there are only 25 what we call super critics, people that have an audience of over 100,000 people. So let's remember those numbers real quick. 25, declining. I also wanted to give you a real quick little math equation about the relevance of how people are competing in the world. These are, again, I just pulled a rough stats out of our database of 80 million conversations and 16 million consumers about how many times someone mentioned these people next to a brand conversation. So not someone saying, oh, I hate Robert Parker, because that's not tied to brand conversation. So trying to understand his influence as relates to wine. And you can see, just randomly, this was a random selection. This doesn't mean this is the first largest, but Jancis completely beats up Robert. And Robert actually follows in line, because a lot of people take on tasting notes and retweet tasting notes that say, Robert Parker says this is a 90. They're not really talking about that, it just drags along. What's very interesting, I thought, was Alder Yarrow and Joe Roberts are really up there. I started to look at some other, like James Suckling, and his stats sucked, so I didn't put him up there. There were quite a few other professional writers that just didn't even make the 1,000 mark. So, but that also brings us to another point, which is who's a blogger and who's a professional journalist. I know this has been played to death, but I can tell you right now, looking up on this screen, you can't point to me and tell me which of these people are professional journalists, meaning that they've been paid. That's my definition of that. And which of these people are bloggers? Can anyone name the journalists up here? They're all both. Everyone up here gets paid, and everyone up here has some sort of blog. How's that? So, let me tell you why this is really interesting in terms of what it means to be a wine communicator, and this is a macro stat. This is an old statistic here, and this is the amount of wines that are in the U.S. market. And actually, last year, it's 200,000 brands, over 200,000 brands, products in the U.S. market, right? So only about 40,000 of these are professionally reviewed. That leaves about 160,000 wines with no home, right? We all know that the number one catalyst for wine sales is recommendation, right? Meaning my friend, a journalist, the 25 power critics, right? I don't know what kind of iron liver you have to drink 200,000 wines to be able to, or even 40,000, right? What this means is that the world of communication, this need for this word of mouth, this need for the sharing from you is more important than ever, right? It's a huge catalyst helping people sell. While Google has lessened the SEO, you're talking about a wine improves its SEO. There's a new thing called authority tied to the new Google algorithms. So that comes to you guys. I'm actually quoting my friend Tyler up here. He doesn't know it, but this little quote at the bottom here is in almost every presentation I make, which, as you saw by the amount of wines, okay, there's 200. We are in the most competitive wine market in human history, and getting worse. Just think about that for a minute. We are also in the most competitive content market in human history, and it's getting worse, right? It's very, very competitive. It's free content. It's a bull market for free content. Not only that, we are now competing against content that's a lesser weight content. It doesn't cost as much to make. And it's also an authority in a wine communicator. So I always say that the most important wine critic in the world is this. It sounds absurd when I say it, but let me show you an absurd example of it. Unfortunately, it's a little blurry up there, but can you see the Pink Floyd wines up there on the right left-hand corner for your side? Okay, on the bottom it says 1,992 people liked that wine. Now, how many of you would jump up and say, I want to drink Pink Floyd wine? Raise your hand. Okay, so that tells a story about that, right? So we again are in our own evolution and our own myopia of what it means to be a wine person, right? And the reality is the average consumer who doesn't know the difference is looking for something to understand, right? They're looking for a reason to buy this Dark Side of the Moon when they somehow landed on this site. And 1,992 clicks of people saying they liked it sure gives them a lot more confidence that it had 0 or 1, right? And what's even more is if one of my friends did it, it would say, Paul did it. Tyler loves Pink Floyd. Merlot. No, not really. So in that piece. The other wine critic, almost every one of our wine interactions actually doesn't occur in front of a computer. This is the illusion, and this is one of the failures of most of the social wine networks that try to get tasting notes up there. Because we don't really care enough to go home, the cost of caring, to go home and write a tasting note. But when I'm in a restaurant, and so full disclosure, we're partnered with a company called Delectable, which is you take a picture and you record your wine experience. If you want to see everything I drank in Rioja so far, you can look up my profile in my Delectable account and see what I thought of it. Right? In my pocket, I took a picture of it. This is the wine critic as well. This is the wine communicator. And I'll tell you an example of how this works in a low-yield example. I don't really care about half of my friends what they drink. I actually don't. I do care about Tyler and David White and Pia because I know that they have a great wine palate, right? I want to actually follow what they have. But I do care about a guy named Yoon Ha, who's one of the best sommeliers in San Francisco, or John Bonnet, who's a wine critic in San Francisco. And by following him in these apps, they're giving me the recommendations of the wines. They're communicating to me wines that they're trying and what they think of them. And I can save that to go ask if I want to buy it. So the new wine critic is also as low yield as a pitcher, right? And while we all share the passion and love for wine blogging and the written word and what it means, the reality is the competitive set around communicators is becoming as simple as people that can take pictures and make a happy face, right? I know that sounds silly, but you can see the happy face on the right there. I was happy when I drank that wine. So if this all scares you and you're worried about the zombie apocalypse taking over, don't worry. I think there's always a place for wine bloggers. I think that you are a key essence of what the ecosphere needs, knowing that there are 200,000 wines in the U.S. market and probably worldwide 450,000 wines is a new estimate I heard. And they need your reviews, and they need your stories, and they need you to share it. So please keep doing it. All right, thank you.
What I love about what Paul does, and just like I love looking at Nielsen stats and customs clearances and so on, is that so much of what a lot of us do when we talk to each other is say, oh, everybody's talking about X, or everybody's drinking Y, and then you just look at the statistics and you think, actually, no, they're not, or actually they're doing something very different. So I found that fascinating. Per, would you like to talk to us about the way you see things?
Let me start with a question, because I'm curious about this. About you. I'm a wine communicator, and I think most of you are wine communicators. So how many of you came into wine communication during the last 2 years? So have been communicating about wine during 2 years or less? Oh, you're ancient. How many of you have been communicating about wine for 5 years or less? Okay. How many have been communicating about wine for 10 years? Everyone more than 10 years communication? Right. Pretty good. How many have you been communicating online for 10 years or more? Getting less and less. Okay. Just to add to what you said, we've been me and my wife, because we work together, we've been communicating about wine for, I don't know, 20 years, something like that. We've been online since 1996, which is probably something I shouldn't say because it makes me feel like an antiquity. Wine communication is very much changing from, obviously, I don't need to say this, from print to online. We used to do a lot of print articles. Now we really don't do that very much. One of the reasons is because it doesn't pay very much because, well, you need to get paid. I'll come back to that. In Sweden, we still have a very, if I take Sweden as an example, we still have very, very important print wine communication activity. We have 3 or 5, I think, wine magazines in Sweden. It's probably the densest wine magazine country in the world with 5 magazines talking about wine. But they're disappearing. Last year, one disappeared, one closed down. Magazines have declining revenues. Some of you still work for them, I think, occasionally. They have declining readerships. And why is that? That's, well, many of the things leading to that is that they don't have the money any longer to pay for quality contents. Well, why is that? And I'm sure you'll be happy to hear this, because there's so much free content online, right? So people don't read magazines much any longer. Well, that is maybe good and it's maybe bad. 3 years ago, something like that, wine blogging took off in Sweden. Sweden was late, so many of you are coming from countries where this started much earlier. 3 years ago it took off. Now we have a lot of very quality contents bloggers in Sweden. One of them is sitting up there. Hi. If you read Swedish, I would say read his blog, but you... However, it's changed even more recently than that. Over the last 1 or 2 years, we have moved from a situation where we have wine bloggers to more ambitious wine sites. Sites which are trying to be more of an online magazine, really. We're one of those. We call ourselves Online BK Wine Magazine. It's not a BK Wine or Per Karlsson blog. It's sites which try and be more ambitious than saying, I drank this last night, or I went to and saw this winemaker in his winery last week. So it's much more also directly in competition with the magazines in print. This is both scary in a way, and it has some problems. It really does have some serious problems. And I will be coming back to something that Clark Smith said yesterday. One of the big problems with this is quality, because there is so much poor quality published online. Bad research, poor homework. Let me take an example. I read something online talking about biodynamic winemaking. And they were talking about how they use the tail of horses in the winemaking. Right? If you're English and if you're a botanist, you know what the problem is. There is a plant called horsetail. So someone had read about this plant being used, but thought it was the tail of a horse.
They might do
right.
that as well.
Yeah, well, you can have cow horns, right. Another example, we've just finished a book on French wine, so we've done quite a lot of online research and come to Wikipedia once upon a time, or quite often. And the things you read on Wikipedia on wine, sometimes it is scary. Sometimes it's very good, but many times it's very scary. So quality is really a problem online. Another thing which is a bit scary, it's even more scary, this one, is about truth and honesty. When wine communication is moving more and more online and is trying to be a serious endeavor, so really wanting to be taken seriously, not just being a hobby blog, but to really want to be taken seriously, it also very much has to do with money. If you want to make some money from your blog, if you want to monetize things, which is one of the subjects that we have skipped on this Wine Bloggers Conference, it is importance with truth and honesty. Let me take an example of that too. There is this wine website, and I won't name the name here, They launched a few years back, and they published a lot of articles on wine and wine recommendations. And then when you start looking at it, you start scratching your head. Well, it seems to be similar kind of wines. And you look deeper, and it turns out that all of the wine recommendations they have, they come from the same wine importer. You dig a bit deeper, and you figure out, and there's a lot of digging you can do on the internet, so you dig a bit deeper, and you discover that the people behind this website is actually the same people kind of linked to this wine importer. Okay, so there's some problem with that. If you want to make wine, if you want to make money on what you're doing online, you have also to talk about statistics. You talked about statistics earlier, but you have to be aware of that people like Paul and people or companies like Google, they can actually see what the truth is, even though many people don't really know how to use that yet. So kind of as a conclusion to this, you have to think about the money. You have to think about, both as a reader, because we're all communicators, so we both read and write, you have to think about the money. Where does the money come from? If you read our blog, or if you read our site, you will quickly realize that we make money primarily from organizing wine tours. We don't really make money from our publications. If you read what Robert is writing, you should realize that he makes money from being a consultant and from running sites like Do I Like It and whatever this new venture. If you read, let me take another example, if you read Louise Hearn's Facebook posts, hi Louise, you need to understand that she's a PR person. If you don't understand where the money is coming from, you will be mistaken when you're communicating online. So, two things. You have to think about the ethics on online communication, and you have to think about the quality. We, as communicators, have to think about the ethics and about the quality. If we do, then we will be here next year and the year after next. Thank you.
And now we'll move on, and I hope this will work, to the one member of the panel who's actually most recently had to be involved in selling wine, and actually you still work sometime for Laithwaites who still sell wine. So I guess yes, you're at the sharper end, maybe than quite a lot of us.
Just while we get the presentation ready, I just want to ask who in the room saw Tim Hannay's presentation just now? Really very few. It's a really, unfortunately, empty session, because it was the best session that's, including this one, I'm afraid, that we're going to see at this conference. I see that we're being videoed. I'm really hoping that was captured, because anyone who didn't see Tim talk, he's a tour de force. He's got an incredibly important message to convey. He talked a lot about wine communicating, in fact, so if you're interested in this topic, do look up the video of Tim talking and absorb what he has to say. And go and talk to him at his table later on. So that's a little advert for Tim. So I'm actually going to start off by just showing a slide that Clark drew our attention to on yesterday, which is George Bernard Shaw's comment about communication. And the single biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it has taken place. Perhaps I'm going to go a little bit like Tim talked personally about his communication difficulties with his wife. I frequently, when I'm talking to my wife, I say something, I think I know what I said, she hears something, she thinks she knows what I said, but we turn out to have thought different things, and then we have an argument about it. Anyone who's married, anyone who has a partner, I suspect the majority of your communication issues are around exactly that. The arguments you have around, did you say that? I thought we were going at 7 o'clock, it's 8 o'clock now, etc., etc. When a pilot hands control of the aeroplane over to another pilot, the first pilot says, you have control, and then the second pilot has to say, I have control. At that point, the first pilot will then let go of the controls. That is good communication. It's validated received communication. I've tried doing this with my wife. I've been accused of being pedantic, going over what it is that she said or what it is that I've said to make sure that she's heard it, but it does improve our level of communication.
Why don't you just say you have control and leave it at that?
Yes. So I want to ask the question, what it is that the general public have received in listening to communications about wine. We heard about there being 87, Paul, was it 87 million people who are wine drinkers who've just not engaged in the United States, who've not engaged with the wine blogging, the wine writing community.
About 450,000 add every month onto the gross. But every month there's 450,000 of those decline off of being not engaged in social media, just to be clear.
Okay. Well, the message is I think a lot of people who are drinking wine are not really engaging with the communications about it. So the questions, the things that I believe that most people think, when you actually do surveys with people, you ask them about what is Chardonnay. A lot of people think it's a town in Australia. A lot of people think that Gigal is a grape variety. The things I think most people know about wine, think they know about wine, first of all, they say, I don't know much about wine, but I know what I like. That actually also isn't true. Very often you can give them wine that they think they don't like, and then they say, when they taste it, they like it. They often say cliches like a good wine, he got better as he got older. They say, the best partner for cheese is red wine. It's rubbish. Never drink red wine with fish. These are the memes that have got into people's heads, and you cannot shift them. You cannot persuade people that good wine don't get better as they get older, that wine should be best when they're young. Condria, disastrous if you age it. It's delicious when it's young. But if you give someone a bottle of Condria and say it's a special wine, I go, ooh, I'll keep it for 10 years until our anniversary, because good wine gets better. That's what people think about wine. Liking sweet wine is unsophisticated. This is very much Tim's message. It's not unsophisticated. There are some amazing sweet wines out there, but it's believed by most people that it's unsophisticated. So the primary emotion that most people have when they're thinking about choosing a wine is fear. That is not a good place for us to be in. People have a fear of getting it wrong, a fear of feeling stupid, a fear of choosing something that other people are going to judge them by, a fear of liking the wrong thing, and a fear of them spending their money on something for a special occasion. They're spending twice what they normally spend, going into territory they don't normally buy, and then buying something that they don't like. That is the primary motivating emotion in choice of wine. It's what restricts people to wines they know, wines their friends have introduced them to, or wines that are on deal. That's why people retreat to those parameters of choice, because they're scared of making a mistake. So I want to know how we dispel the unhelpful memes that have got into people's heads. The meme about a wine expert being scary, someone who isn't going to help you, you want to stay well away from it. There was some research recently that proved that wine experts don't know what they're talking about, because it analysed the results of various competitions and showed that people gave medals in a way that wasn't consistent. Wine got a no medal in one competition and a gold in another, and these experts didn't know what they were talking about. And people loved that. They felt it validated their belief that wine experts are talking nonsense. Wine consumers don't like wine experts. They're scared of them. We put them off. We wear cravats. We look snotty. We give them rules that they should listen to, and they don't like it. So what they do is they listen to brands, because brands talk to them in a language they understand, and they listen to celebrities, and they listen to people who are not wine experts. So if, I guarantee if Joanna Lumley said, my favourite champagne is Paul Roger, not Bolly, people would start drinking Paul Roger because they'd trust her, because she's an ordinary person. So I think most of the communicating that we, the wine experts, do never reaches its target, because they just aren't listening. They were talking to each other, and ordinary members of the ordinary drinking public are not understanding and hearing our messages. So is there a solution to that? What is it that does get across? I'm sure many of us, most of us probably have seen Sideways. I know that this is a statement that moved the needle on sales in the States. It's measurable. Merlot sales dropped. Pinot Noir sales went up 16%, I think. Merlot sales went down 2%. So yeah, a lot of ordinary people who normally drank Merlot carried on drinking Merlot, but definitely some people thought, maybe I shouldn't drink Merlot, and a lot of people started drinking Pinot Noir. This is kind of mass cultural references. this is what has impact on people, not what most wine writers write. So yeah, there you go. So that's what happened to the sales after the film Sideways came out. So is it a hopeless case trying to write about wine or communicate about wine? I think we're targeting the wrong generation. So I've got quite a few children on the slide here. I went to my son's school, and of course I wasn't allowed to bring in wine, so we did jelly bean tasting instead. And I put a blindfold on, I gave them all, sounds a bit dodgy this, blindfolding children, giving them sweets. I hadn't thought this through. I gave them a jelly bean blind and said, what flavour is it? And I made them block their noses. And then when they unblocked their nose, they could suddenly taste the flavour, because before it was just sweet, and then they unblock their nose and they realise it's lemon rather than strawberry. I think that by teaching young people to use their senses, we will start a language that people will be comfortable about, and therefore they will not feel scared by the language that we use when we're talking about wine. We all, when we're learning wine, we all learned the language, and now we know the language, we can talk to each other and we can communicate. But most people who are out there in the world don't have a language for taste and smell. It's very, very difficult to persuade people to have confidence in talking about wine. You ask anyone a question about wine, they immediately clam up and they go, "Oh, I don't know much about wine, but I know what I like." And having people to have confidence in a common shared language, I think would be really helpful. So I believe that the secret lies in education, actually at school level, of tasting and smelling food and drink and being able to identify things and use your sense of smell and taste in a scientific way, in a measurable way. And then once people have some confidence in the language, encourage them. Don't make them afraid. Make them excited and engaged by what you're talking about. I think that one other thing that is going to be more and more helpful are tools that enable people to discover wines that they like. So people who missed Tim's talk, he talked a lot about individuals having personal preferences, that they're genetically inbuilt in them, but also that they've developed over time, and that those preferences are fixed to that person. If we understand what those preferences are, we may be able to sell them wine better. And I think you can triangulate people's preferences by understanding what they buy, understanding what they rate, and using that information to recommend things to them that they're going to have a much higher chance of liking. So apps that do that, website tools that do that, will gain a lot of loyalty and trust and confidence, whereas writing lots of words about it won't perhaps help. So education, and possibly wine education, more courses for wine consumers, make them fun, make them engaging, bring people into the world of wine, make them have fun drinking wine, and then they won't be so scared. So finally, remember that when you give a man a fish, he eats for the day. When you teach a man to fish, then you get rid of him for the whole weekend. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Depends how hungry you are, guys. We could call it a day now, or we can take some questions. Have you got some questions? Or are you just dying of hunger? Any hands up for questions, if there are any? Not one? That means there is one there. That's Damien Wilson, I think. Hold on, there's a mic coming.
Thanks, Robert. I won't hold you up too long for lunch. I just wanted to point out that I like the idea of the language and of having children grow up having a greater use of their senses. But I wonder how much of it is our need to focus on our skills of communication. I mean, Paul Mabray presented some brilliant statistics on the challenge we're facing, that we're pretty much irrelevant to most people who consume wine. And yet, as Wagner, Olsen and Tatch found out in 2007, if you're a wine person, if you drink wine, 99% of people have internet access at the home. So we've got the way to communicate to them. We've got a medium in which they can use, but they're just not using it. And it's because, is it because they don't grow up enjoying their senses, or is it because we're just not communicating correctly?
I think that's probably a good question to leave it on, rather than less. Would you like to answer? Anyone like to answer that, or is it an open question?
I think it's a good question to leave it on.
Okay. Yeah. Listen, I'd like to thank my panel. I'd like to say that if you do watch, I agree. I was sorry I missed Tim Hanai's piece. I know that's going to be good, and I want to watch it. And there's some great stuff there. And I watched the video to pick up on some of those stats from Paul and have a look at the Vintank site. But also, Per takes great photographs. He didn't get a chance to mention it, but photographs are another form of communication. So, and that's part of it. Read Dr. Vino and follow Justin. Thank you all very much. Bon appetit.